I never imagined that the greatest betrayal of my life would come from the only child I had left. When I discovered my late mother Margaret's necklace was missing my daughter, Olivia calmly admitted she'd sold it behind my back to pay off her debts. But before the buyer could take possession, he made one strange demand. "I don't want the necklace, not until I meet Francis Hayes in person." At that moment, I realized this wasn't about a piece of jewelry anymore. It was about a secret my mother had carried to her grave, and someone had spent decades waiting to tell me. If this story touches your heart, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you would have done if your own child had sold your most precious family heirloom without asking. Please like this video, subscribe for more heartfelt stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. The entire drive to downtown Asheville passed in complete silence. Olivia gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Every few minutes, she glanced at her phone, checking for another message from the mysterious buyer. Nothing. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the Blue Ridge Mountains disappeared behind rows of brick buildings and tree-lined streets. Usually, I loved this part of town. Asheville had always felt welcoming, full of artists, bookstores, cafes, and old architecture that reminded me why I had never wanted to leave. Today, everything looked different. My thoughts kept returning to one image, the empty velvet jewelry box inside my bedroom dresser. For more than 40 years, I had opened that box whenever life became too difficult. After my husband Thomas died from pancreatic cancer 6 years earlier, I had held my mother's necklace in my hands nearly every night. I never wore it often because I was afraid of damaging it, but simply knowing it was there gave me comfort. It was the last thing my mother had placed around my neck just days before she passed away. She had smiled, brushed my hair behind my ear, and whispered, "Take good care of this, Frankie." She always called me Frankie. At the time, I thought she simply meant the necklace was valuable because it had belonged to her own mother. I never imagined those words might have meant something far more important. Olivia finally broke the silence. "Mom, can we please not make this into something bigger than it already is?" I looked at her. "You sold something that wasn't yours." "I know." You didn't even ask. I needed the money. You needed permission." She sighed dramatically. "I was going to tell you afterward." I almost laughed. "After it was gone forever." She didn't answer. Instead, she focused on the traffic light ahead. "I've been drowning, Mom." "So you threw me the anchor." Her jaw tightened. "I've made mistakes. You've made choices." Another long silence settled between us. I hated arguing with my daughter. When she was little, she had been the kindest child imaginable. She used to rescue injured birds. She cried whenever cartoons showed someone lonely. She once spent 3 months saving her allowance just to buy me a Mother's Day scarf from the school gift shop. Where had that little girl gone? Somewhere between failed business ventures, mounting credit card debt, and chasing lifestyles she couldn't afford, she had slowly become someone I barely recognized. "I'm trying to fix everything," she muttered. "No," I said softly. "You're trying to fix everything with money." She looked away. Neither of us spoke again until the GPS announced our destination. The building didn't look like a jewelry store. It was a beautifully restored 19th century brick structure with polished brass letters reading Carter Historical Jewelry and Estate Collections. The windows displayed antique clocks, vintage brooches, handcrafted silver pieces, and old family portraits. There wasn't a single flashy diamond advertisement, no neon signs, no discount banners. Everything about the place whispered elegance instead of wealth. Olivia frowned. "This is weird." "It certainly isn't a pawn shop." She parked the car. Before we stepped inside, she grabbed my arm. "Mom." "What? If this guy suddenly says the necklace is worth more than he paid..." I stared at her. "Don't tell him you want it back." I slowly removed her hand from my sleeve. "I didn't come here for money." She rolled her eyes. "I know." "No," I replied quietly. "I don't think you do." The bell above the door chimed softly as we entered. The shop smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. Glass display cases stretched across the room, each filled with carefully arranged antique jewelry dating back more than a century. Behind one counter stood a tall man with silver hair neatly combed back. He wore a navy blazer instead of an expensive suit. Thin reading glasses rested low on his nose. He looked up. The moment his eyes met mine, everything changed. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved, as though he had been waiting far longer than just a few days. He walked toward us slowly. "You must be Francis Hayes." His voice was calm, warm, respectful. I nodded, yes. He smiled gently. "My name is Benjamin Carter." He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was steady, not rushed, not overly friendly, just sincere. "Thank you for coming." Olivia stepped forward immediately. "I'm Olivia Hayes. We spoke yesterday." Benjamin turned toward her politely. "Yes." She smiled. "So, about the necklace." Benjamin looked back at me instead. "I'd actually like to speak with your mother first." Olivia blinked. "I'm the one who sold it." "I understand." "So why am I suddenly not part of this conversation?" Benjamin remained perfectly calm. "Because the necklace never truly belonged to you." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even I felt my chest tighten. Olivia folded her arms. "I had legal possession," Benjamin answered carefully. "Possession and ownership are not always the same thing." She frowned. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" "It means some things carry responsibilities beyond paperwork." Olivia let out an irritated laugh. "This is ridiculous." Benjamin didn't react. Instead, he gestured toward a private sitting room in the back of the gallery. "If Mrs. Hayes would join me for a few minutes." "I'm coming too," Olivia insisted. Benjamin hesitated only briefly. "You're welcome to sit in." His tone remained courteous. "But I would ask that you allow your mother to answer my questions." We followed him into a beautifully furnished office lined with shelves filled with leather-bound books. Framed black and white photographs covered one wall. Many showed jewelers working at old wooden benches. Others depicted families wearing antique heirlooms. Benjamin invited us to sit. He disappeared briefly into another room before returning with a velvet tray. On it rested my mother's necklace. Seeing it again made my heart ache. Without thinking, I reached toward it. Benjamin gently stopped me. "One moment." His voice wasn't unkind. "I've waited many years for this meeting." Olivia frowned again. "What are you talking about?" Benjamin ignored the question. Instead, he looked directly at me. "Mrs. Hayes, when was the last time you saw your mother?" The question caught me off guard. I swallowed. 31 years ago. "And her name?" "Margaret Hayes." His eyes softened. "Margaret Ann Hayes." I froze. "Yes." "Born in 1,931 inches." "Yes." He nodded almost to himself. "And your grandmother?" I searched my memory. "Eleanor." He closed his eyes briefly, almost as though another missing piece had fallen into place. Olivia leaned forward impatiently. "Can somebody please explain what's happening?" Benjamin finally looked at her. "I will. But first..." He reached into a drawer and carefully removed a worn leather folder tied with a faded ribbon. He laid it beside the necklace. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "I've spent almost 20 years searching for Francis Hayes." My heartbeat quickened. "You... what?" "I had no idea whether you were still alive. I searched census records, old city directories, church archives, library records. I even hired researchers in 3 different states." I stared at him, unable to speak. Olivia looked equally stunned. Benjamin rested one hand gently on the leather folder. "When your daughter sold me this necklace, I realized my search was finally over." The room became impossibly quiet. Then Benjamin spoke the sentence that made every hair on my arm stand up. "I don't care about owning this necklace. I've been trying to return something to your family that should never have been lost." For several long seconds, no one in the room spoke. The silence felt almost sacred, broken only by the steady ticking of an antique mantel clock somewhere behind Benjamin Carter's desk. I stared at him, trying to decide whether I should feel frightened or hopeful. 20 years. He had just said he had spent 20 years searching for me. That wasn't something a person casually admitted. Olivia was the first to recover. "I'm sorry," she said with an awkward laugh, "but none of this makes any sense. You bought a necklace from me, and now you're talking like it's part of some treasure hunt." Benjamin remained perfectly composed. "I understand why you think that." "Then explain it." "I intend to." He gently untied the faded ribbon wrapped around the leather folder. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved documents. Some were photographs. Others appeared to be handwritten letters. A few looked like old workshop receipts printed on yellowed paper. Benjamin didn't immediately show me everything. Instead, he lifted my mother's necklace from the velvet tray with a pair of white cotton gloves. Only then did I notice how carefully he handled it. Not like a collector touching something expensive, like someone holding a fragile memory. "I'd like to ask you one more question, Mrs. Hayes." I nodded. "When your mother gave you this necklace, did she ever tell you never to repair it?" His question startled me. I searched my memory. Then a faint image surfaced. I was 36. My mother was already weak from heart disease. She had fastened the necklace around my neck and smiled. "If anything ever happens to it," she had whispered, "promise me you'll never let just anyone fix it." At the time, I had laughed. "I'll probably never even wear it enough to break it." She had squeezed my hand. "Promise me anyway." I remembered making that promise. I'd completely forgotten it until this moment. My eyes widened. "She did." Benjamin smiled softly. I thought she might have. Olivia folded her arms. "So," Benjamin looked toward her, "so your grandmother understood something you didn't." He carefully turned the necklace over. "For most people, this clasp appears perfectly ordinary." He placed a magnifying lamp over the necklace. "Mrs. Hayes, would you come closer?" I moved beside him. He adjusted the light until it shone directly across the tiny gold clasp. "What do you see?" "Nothing." "Look again." He rotated the necklace by only a few degrees. Suddenly, a faint line caught the light. It was so thin I never would have noticed it. Benjamin handed me a jeweler's loupe. I pressed it against my eye. There, barely visible, was a microscopic engraving. My breath caught. The letters were almost impossibly small. MH beneath them was a date, October 14th, 1968. I lowered the loupe. "I've owned this necklace for over 30 years. "I never saw that." Benjamin nodded. "Very few people ever would." Olivia leaned over. "Seriously." Benjamin handed her another magnifier. She looked. A moment later, the skepticism disappeared from her face. "There really is something there." She looked back at Benjamin. "Who engraved it?" "Not who." He smiled faintly. "Who commissioned it?" He opened one of the old folders and removed a brittle receipt protected inside archival plastic. Across the top was printed Whitmore Jewelry Studio, established 1941. The handwritten invoice listed one custom gold necklace, special concealed mechanism, private inscription, customer Margaret Ann Hayes. My heart skipped. "My mother," Benjamin nodded. "She ordered a custom modification." Olivia frowned. What modification? Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the clasp again. "You'll notice this doesn't resemble ordinary jewelry construction." I examined it more carefully. Now that I knew where to look, I saw it. The clasp wasn't actually one piece. It consisted of two nearly invisible layers. Benjamin reached into a drawer and removed an antique precision tool no larger than a sewing needle. "I won't open it today." He looked directly at me. "Not until you're ready." Olivia groaned. "Oh, come on." "You're dragging this out." Benjamin ignored the interruption. "There are reasons your mother insisted no ordinary jeweler ever repair this necklace." I swallowed. "What reasons?" He looked at me carefully. "Because someone unfamiliar with its construction could destroy what she spent months creating." A chill ran down my spine. Destroy what there was more than an engraving. There had to be. Benjamin returned the necklace to its velvet tray. "I first encountered references to this necklace 19 years ago." He pulled another folder from the cabinet. Inside were photocopies of workshop journals belonging to Arthur Whitmore. The original jeweler kept remarkably detailed records. He flipped several pages, finally stopping at one marked October 1968. He slid the page toward me. The handwriting was elegant but faded. I could only read portions. Mrs. Hayes insisted, "Must remain hidden. Daughter must discover only when—" My eyes blurred. "I can't read all of it." "The ink has deteriorated," Benjamin admitted, "but enough survived." Olivia leaned over impatiently. "So what does it actually say?" Benjamin adjusted the protective sleeve. "It records your grandmother's instructions." He looked at me. "She requested that this necklace only be examined if it ever left your family." I stared at him. "What? Those were her exact instructions." Olivia blinked. "That's impossible," Benjamin calmly continued. "Arthur Whitmore questioned her decision. She reportedly answered," he consulted another page, "if my daughter ever loses this necklace willingly, then she doesn't yet need the truth. But if someone else takes it from her fate has chosen the time." My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe for a second. My mother had anticipated something like this. Not specifically Olivia, but somehow she believed circumstances might one day separate me from the necklace. Benjamin watched my reaction. I realized this sounds unbelievable. It does. But everything I have comes directly from Arthur Whitmore's archived records. Olivia stood up. "I don't buy any of this." She paced across the office. "So my grandmother somehow predicted I'd sell it." "No." Benjamin's voice remained calm. "She predicted that life is unpredictable." Olivia rubbed her forehead. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. Both of them looked at me. I stared at the necklace. My mother always planned ahead. When Dad lost his job, she'd already hidden enough money to cover 6 months of bills. When hurricanes came, she already had emergency supplies. When she became sick, she had already labeled every photograph in the attic because she didn't want future generations forgetting names. Tears formed unexpectedly. This actually sounds like her." Benjamin smiled sadly. "I thought you might say that." He opened one final folder. Inside was a black and white photograph. An elderly jeweler stood beside a younger woman. The woman wore the necklace. Even though the picture wasn't especially clear, I recognized her instantly. "My mother," my voice cracked. Benjamin nodded. "Taken the day Arthur Whitmore completed the custom work." I touched the edge of the photograph without lifting it. She looked so young, so hopeful. I hadn't seen that smile in decades. Benjamin carefully returned the photograph to its sleeve. Then he folded his hands. "There is one more thing." Neither Olivia nor I spoke. He looked directly into my eyes. "The engraving isn't the secret." My heartbeat quickened again. "The clasp isn't the secret either," he paused. "The real reason I've spent 20 years searching for Frances Hayes is because your mother left something inside this necklace that was never meant for anyone else." No one moved. The words hung in the air so heavily that I could almost feel them pressing against my chest. My mother left something inside this necklace, not beside it, not hidden in a safety deposit box, inside it. For more than 30 years, I had believed this necklace was simply a beautiful keepsake, a final gift from a loving mother to her daughter. I had worn it on birthdays, anniversaries, my husband's funeral, and every Christmas since she passed away, and yet somehow I had never known what I was really carrying. Benjamin must have noticed the disbelief on my face. "I know exactly how this sounds," he said gently. "I've spent years trying to convince myself Arthur Whitmore's records were mistaken." "Were they?" He slowly shook his head. "No." He walked toward one of the bookshelves and returned with a thick leather-bound journal. "This is Arthur Whitmore's workshop journal." He carefully opened it near the middle. I was fortunate enough to acquire these journals after his grandson donated the family's workshop archives to a historical preservation foundation. His finger rested on a page dated October 1968. Arthur wasn't simply a master jeweler. He documented everything. I leaned closer. The handwriting was elegant but faded with age. Some sentences remained perfectly readable. Others had been damaged by time. Benjamin read aloud. Mrs. Margaret Ann Hayes returned today. She requested absolute secrecy regarding the hidden compartment. She stated only her daughter, Frances, should ever learn its existence. My throat tightened. Benjamin continued, "If circumstances prevent me from telling Frances myself, life will eventually find a way." He looked up. "Those were your mother's exact words." I felt tears gathering again. She actually said my name. Several times. Olivia remained standing beside the window. Her expression had changed. The impatience that had filled her face earlier had begun to give way to uncertainty. She crossed her arms more tightly. "So, why wouldn't Grandma simply tell Mom?" Benjamin sighed softly. That question troubled Arthur as well. He turned another page. There, he pointed to another entry. "Mrs. Hayes believes her daughter must discover the truth only after experiencing profound loss. Otherwise, she may mistake the message for advice instead of understanding it as wisdom." I closed my eyes. Profound loss. By the time my mother died, I had already lost my father. Years later, I lost Thomas. Then little by little, I lost the closeness I once shared with my own daughter. Perhaps my mother had understood something I couldn't possibly have understood while she was still alive. Benjamin carefully closed the journal. I've often wondered whether she knew her time was short. "I think she did," I answered without hesitation. "When she became ill, she suddenly started organizing everything. She labeled old family photographs. She wrote recipes in her own handwriting. She recorded birthdays and anniversaries inside a small notebook she insisted I keep. She even wrote letters to neighbors, thanking them for kindness they had shown years earlier. At the time, I thought she was simply putting her affairs in order. Now, it felt like she had been preparing a map, one I hadn't realized existed." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds very much like the woman described throughout Arthur's journals." Olivia finally spoke again. "I still don't understand why you spent 20 years looking for Mom." Benjamin smiled faintly. "Because promises matter." He walked toward another cabinet and removed an old framed photograph. "This is my father." The picture showed a young man in his 20s standing beside Arthur Whitmore inside a jewelry workshop. Tiny tools covered the workbench. Gold chains hung from wooden pegs. "My father, Samuel Carter, apprenticed under Arthur during the late 1960s. Benjamin traced the edge of the frame with one finger. "They became more like family than employer and employee. When Arthur grew older, my father helped organize his records. And after Arthur passed away," Benjamin smiled sadly, "my father inherited the responsibility of preserving them." He looked directly at me. "A few weeks before my father died, he asked me to make him a promise." The room grew quiet once more. "Why, he told me there was one unfinished story among Arthur's papers." "A story," Benjamin nodded. "He said there was a mother who had trusted Arthur with something priceless. He feared no one would ever return it to its rightful owner." I frowned. "But why didn't your father search for me himself?" "He tried." Benjamin's voice softened. "But records weren't as accessible then. Your last known address had changed. Phone numbers changed. Your married name appeared on some documents. Other records still listed your maiden name." He smiled apologetically. "You became surprisingly difficult to find." Despite everything, I let out the smallest laugh. "I've lived in North Carolina for nearly 30 years. "I know," he chuckled quietly. "And yet every lead I followed ended just one step too late." Olivia looked at him carefully. "So when I sold the necklace," Benjamin nodded. "I recognized it immediately." "You recognized it from one picture?" "Not just one." He walked toward a display cabinet and retrieved several enlarged photographs. Each showed different angles of my mother's necklace. Tiny details had been circled in red. The handcrafted vine pattern, the asymmetrical clasp, the unusual solder marks. No two necklaces like this were ever made. He smiled. "The moment I opened your package, I knew exactly what I was looking at." I looked at Olivia. She stared silently at the photographs. For the first time since we'd entered the gallery, she looked genuinely shaken. "I almost mailed it immediately to another collector," she admitted quietly. Benjamin nodded. I know. I already had another offer, much higher than yours. I wasn't interested. Olivia looked confused. You could have made a fortune. I wasn't searching for money. He looked at me. I was searching for Francis Hayes. Those words settled deep inside me. All these years while I had believed my life was becoming smaller, retirement, widowhood, quiet mornings, alone with coffee and crossword puzzles, a complete stranger had been quietly searching for me because of a promise made before I even understood its importance. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I whispered, "Thank you." Benjamin smiled gently. "I haven't earned your gratitude yet." He looked toward the velvet tray where the necklace still rested beneath the warm light. "There is still one final step." My heartbeat quickened. "What step?" He became unusually serious. "I need your permission." "For what?" He hesitated. "I believe it's finally time to open the hidden compartment." The room instantly fell silent again. Olivia took an involuntary step closer. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. For decades, my mother's greatest secret had rested only a few inches away from me. I slowly reached toward the necklace. This time Benjamin didn't stop me. Instead, he carefully placed it into my trembling hands. The gold felt unexpectedly warm, almost alive. I ran my thumb across the tiny engraved initials. M.H. Margaret Hayes. My mother, whatever she had hidden, whatever she had wanted me to know, I was finally standing at the edge of discovering it. Benjamin opened a small wooden box lined with dark blue velvet. Inside lay several antique precision tools, unlike anything I had ever seen. He selected one no larger than a sewing needle. Looking directly into my eyes, he asked one last time, "Mrs. Hayes, are you ready to hear the truth your mother protected for nearly 60 years?" I looked down at the necklace resting in my hands. Its delicate gold chain slipped through my trembling fingers, catching the warm light from Benjamin Carter's desk lamp. For a moment, I couldn't answer him. Was I ready? How could anyone ever be ready to uncover a secret their own mother had guarded for nearly 60 years? Benjamin seemed to understand my hesitation. "You don't have to decide this instant." I took a slow breath. "No," I looked up. "I've spent half my life wondering if there were things I should have asked my mother before she died." My voice wavered. "I'm not walking away now." Benjamin gave a respectful nod. "I thought you might say that." Before he reached for the precision tool, Olivia suddenly stepped forward. "Wait!" Both of us turned toward her. She stared at the necklace with wide eyes. "Before you open it," she hesitated. "I need to know something." Benjamin remained patient. "What is it? How much is this necklace actually worth?" The question landed like a stone in still water. I closed my eyes. Even now, after everything she had heard, money was still the first thing on her mind. Benjamin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully placed the tool back inside its velvet case. "I was wondering when you'd ask." Olivia crossed her arms. "That's a fair question." "It is." "So," Benjamin folded his hands together. "What answer are you hoping for?" "I just want the truth." "No." His tone remained calm. "You want a number?" Olivia frowned. "Is that wrong?" "It depends." He leaned back slightly. "If I told you this necklace was worth $3,000, would you feel disappointed?" She hesitated. "Maybe. And if I told you it was worth $50,000, I'd be shocked. And if I said it could sell for hundreds of thousands," she looked at him expectantly, "I'd probably feel like I made a terrible mistake." Benjamin smiled faintly. "You already made a terrible mistake." The room fell silent. "But not because of money." Olivia's face hardened. "You keep saying things like that because they're true." She let out a frustrated sigh. "You still haven't answered my question." Benjamin slowly stood and walked toward a locked display cabinet. He unlocked it and removed 3 antique necklaces, placing them carefully on the table beside my mother's. Each was beautiful. Each looked remarkably old. "Do you know what these are?" Olivia shook her head. Benjamin pointed to the first, Victorian gold. The second, Art Nouveau. The third, Edwardian platinum. He looked at us. Together, these 3 pieces are worth more than $200,000. Olivia's eyebrows shot upward. Seriously? Yes. He paused. And yet, he gently pushed them aside. None of them interest me as much as your mother's necklace. Olivia frowned. Why? Because collectors buy jewelry. He looked directly at me. Historians preserve stories. His words settled deep inside me. Benjamin continued. I've had wealthy clients offer extraordinary sums for this necklace over the years. You've had it before. No. I've had photographs, sketches, archived descriptions. They all wanted the object. He smiled sadly. I wanted the woman it belonged to. I lowered my eyes. No one had ever spoken about my mother with such respect. It wasn't admiration for wealth. It wasn't fascination with rarity. It was admiration for the person she had been. Olivia still wasn't convinced. So you're saying it isn't expensive? Benjamin answered honestly. It is valuable. How valuable? That depends on who's asking. She sighed loudly. That's not an answer. It is the only honest answer. He picked up the necklace. As jewelry. Perhaps $70,000 or $80,000. Olivia inhaled sharply. I felt my own heart skip. I had expected a few thousand. Not that. Benjamin continued before either of us could speak. But if its historical documentation remains intact, if its provenance can be verified, if everything Arthur Whitmore recorded proves accurate, he looked at me, then it becomes priceless. Olivia laughed nervously. Priceless isn't a number. No. It's something collectors hate hearing. She rubbed her temples. I don't understand. Benjamin walked toward one wall covered with framed photographs. He pointed toward one showing dozens of visitors inside a museum. Do you know why museums exist? To display history. Exactly. They preserve objects because objects tell human stories. He turned back toward us. If someone stole Abraham Lincoln's handwritten Gettysburg Address, would its value come from the paper? Olivia slowly shook her head. No. It comes from the story. Benjamin nodded. Your grandmother understood that. I couldn't stop looking at the necklace. How many times had I held it without realizing it carried far more than memories? Benjamin carefully returned it to the velvet tray. Mrs. Hayes, I believe Margaret knew exactly what she was creating. I frowned. My mother wasn't a jeweler. No, but she understood symbolism. He opened Arthur Whitmore's journal again. This entry fascinated me. He adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Hayes insisted that no amount of money should tempt her descendants into forgetting where they came from. He glanced toward Olivia. If they ever value gold more than family, the necklace has failed its purpose. The words struck like lightning. Olivia looked away immediately. I watched her shoulders tense. Benjamin closed the journal gently. I don't believe your grandmother meant those words as condemnation. What do you mean? I think she knew temptation eventually visits every family. He looked directly at Olivia. Debt, success, failure, greed, fear. They simply wear different faces. Olivia remained silent. Benjamin continued more softly. The question isn't whether temptation comes. It's whether we recognize ourselves afterward. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. I didn't sell it because I hated my family. Her voice was quieter than before. I was desperate. I know. Benjamin's answer surprised her. You know, I've spent my entire career studying family heirlooms. He smiled sadly. Very few are sold because people stop loving each other. They're usually sold because life becomes overwhelming. Bills, medical expenses, divorce, addiction, bankruptcy, unexpected tragedy. He paused. The sale itself isn't always the greatest tragedy. What is? When people stop asking what they're really giving away. Those words seemed to hit Olivia harder than anything else Benjamin had said all afternoon. She sat down without another word. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't thinking about the necklace's price. She was thinking about why she'd been willing to sell it at all. Benjamin quietly watched both of us before speaking again. There is one more reason I delayed opening the hidden compartment. I looked at him. What reason? I needed to know whether both of you understood that whatever we discover inside, he rested one hand lightly on the necklace, will almost certainly matter far more than anything this piece of gold could ever be worth. I nodded slowly. I understand. He looked toward Olivia. And you? She stared at the necklace for a long time. When she finally answered, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I think I'm beginning to. Benjamin smiled gently. Good. He opened the velvet tool case once more. This secret has remained untouched since 1968. He carefully selected the smallest instrument. The room became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. Benjamin positioned the necklace beneath the magnifying lamp. Then, with extraordinary precision, he inserted the tiny tool into an almost invisible seam hidden beneath the engraved initials. A faint metallic click echoed across the room. Benjamin froze. His eyes widened ever so slightly. He slowly looked up at me. It's exactly where Arthur said it would be. No one breathed. The tiny metallic click seemed impossibly loud inside Benjamin Carter's office. His hand remained perfectly still, the precision tool resting against the hidden seam beneath the engraved initials. It's exactly where Arthur said it would be, he repeated almost to himself. I found myself gripping the edge of the table. What happens now? Benjamin looked at me before answering. Now we find out whether your mother trusted the right people. I frowned. The right people, he nodded. Arthur Whitmore wrote that the compartment should never be opened out of greed or curiosity alone. His eyes met mine. It was meant to be opened by someone searching for truth. Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I don't know if I deserve to be here. Neither Benjamin nor I answered immediately. The silence itself seemed to answer her. Benjamin adjusted the magnifying lamp, flooding the necklace with warm white light. The gold shimmered softly. He turned the clasp only a fraction of an inch. Another faint click. Then, something extraordinary happened. The back of the pendant separated ever so slightly, revealing a paper-thin opening, no wider than the edge of a fingernail. I stared in disbelief. I've owned this necklace for decades. I know. I never knew. Almost no one would. Benjamin carefully reached for a pair of antique tweezers. His movements were so slow that they resembled those of a surgeon. Gold expands and contracts over time, he explained quietly. Arthur designed the mechanism so naturally that most jewelers would assume it was solid. He inserted the tweezers into the tiny opening. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then he gently withdrew them. Between the tips rested something no larger than a grain of rice. No, it was folded. A tiny square of yellowed paper. Olivia leaned forward. Is that? Benjamin nodded. Paper. My heartbeat pounded inside my ears. After all these years, it's incredibly delicate. He carried it to another table, already prepared with archival gloves, soft brushes, and preservation tools. I've dealt with Civil War documents younger than this one. He smiled faintly. Let's hope time has been kind. Using another pair of tweezers, he placed the folded paper beneath a sheet of protective glass. Little by little, he began unfolding it. Each movement took patience. One careless touch could reduce it to dust. I realized I had stopped blinking. When the final fold opened, a tiny handwritten sentence appeared, only 6 words. Benjamin adjusted the light. He looked at the writing, then at me. His expression changed completely. What is it? I whispered. He swallowed. It's addressed to you. My throat tightened. Read it. He hesitated. I think you should. I can't. My hands were shaking too badly. Benjamin gently turned the protective glass toward me. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, rounded, careful. My mother's. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Even after 31 years, I recognized every curve of every letter. I leaned closer and read aloud. My dearest Frankie. My voice broke. I paused, forcing myself to continue. If you are reading this, it means life has surprised us both. Only one sentence. Yet it felt as though my mother were standing beside me again. I covered my mouth with one hand. She called me Frankie. Benjamin smiled gently. I know. I never told you that. You didn't have to. He opened Arthur Whitmore's journal once more. According to his notes, your mother insisted the message remain short. Why, because she believed the real letter would someday find you another way. The real letter, Benjamin nodded. This was only meant to confirm you had opened the necklace correctly. Olivia looked completely confused. So this isn't the whole message? No. Benjamin carefully returned the tiny note beneath the protective cover. This was never intended to answer questions. It was intended to point us towards something else. My pulse quickened again. Toward what? Benjamin reached into the leather folder and removed another document. It wasn't handwritten. It was an inventory sheet from Arthur Whitmore's workshop. One line had been circled decades ago. Customer instructions deliver final correspondence only upon verified recovery of concealed message. I looked up. What does that mean? Benjamin smiled sadly. It means your mother left another letter. Hope surged through me. You have it. His smile disappeared. No. The hope faded almost instantly. I don't. Then where is it? Benjamin slowly folded the document. That's the question my father spent years trying to answer. The room fell silent once more. Olivia rubbed her forehead. So we're chasing another missing letter. Benjamin nodded. Not exactly. He walked toward another filing cabinet. From the bottom drawer, he removed a long rectangular box. Inside lay dozens of neatly labeled envelopes. Every one of them looked old. Very old. Arthur Whitmore archived every unfinished commission separately. He pointed toward a label. Henderson. Another. Brooks. Another. Williams. Then he stopped. One compartment was empty. Its label simply read Hayes. My breath caught. There was an envelope. There was. What happened to it? Benjamin sighed. When Arthur passed away in 1989, the workshop was packed into storage. My father cataloged everything, but one envelope had already disappeared. When? We don't know. Stolen, possibly. Lost. Also possible. He looked genuinely frustrated. For years, we believed the envelope had simply been destroyed. So why search for me, I asked. Because of something Arthur wrote in his final notebook. Benjamin opened another journal. Near the bottom of one page was a single sentence underlined twice. If the Hayes letter is ever lost, the necklace itself will reveal the next step. A chill ran through me. The necklace. Benjamin nodded toward the tiny handwritten message beneath the glass. Your mother planned for failure. Failure? In case the main letter disappeared. I closed my eyes. That sounded exactly like Margaret Hayes. She'd always made backup plans. When I was a child, she kept an extra house key buried beneath a flower pot. She hid emergency cash inside old recipe books. She even kept duplicate family photographs in different albums. She trusted people, but she trusted preparation even more. Benjamin smiled. I've been waiting 20 years to confirm Arthur wasn't mistaken. And now we know your mother anticipated every possibility. Olivia stared quietly at the tiny note. I can't believe Grandma thought this far ahead. Neither could I. Benjamin carefully picked up the necklace again. There's something else. What? The hidden compartment. He turned it toward us. It isn't empty. Both Olivia and I leaned forward at once. I only removed the folded note. He carefully angled the pendant beneath the light. Deep inside the tiny cavity, something metallic reflected back. Small, dark, barely visible. Benjamin's eyebrows lifted. I don't think your mother hid only one thing in here. He carefully reached for the tweezers again, this time when he gently pulled upward. A tiny brass key emerged from the hidden chamber. It couldn't have been more than an inch long. All three of us stared at it in stunned silence. Benjamin whispered the only words any of us could think. This changes everything. No one spoke. The tiny brass key rested in Benjamin Carter's gloved hand, gleaming beneath the magnifying lamp. It looked too small to matter, yet somehow it carried the weight of nearly 60 years. I could barely take my eyes off it. My mother hid a key Benjamin nodded slowly. It certainly appears that way. Olivia leaned closer, her earlier impatience completely replaced by genuine curiosity. It can't possibly open a normal house door. No. Benjamin turned it carefully between his fingers. It isn't designed for that. He walked toward a cabinet and returned with another magnifying loupe. Mrs. Hayes, would you like to look? I nodded. Taking the loupe, I brought the key close to my eye. Its craftsmanship was remarkable. The teeth were unusually fine, and the bow was engraved with an elegant decorative border. At first I thought there were no markings. Then I noticed tiny letters stamped along one side. I squinted harder. B, another letter, H, and beneath them, I lowered the loupe. There are initials. Benjamin smiled. I saw them too. What do they mean? I'm not certain. Olivia immediately answered, bank. Benjamin looked at her. You think so? BH could stand for a bank, she shrugged. It's the first thing that came to mind. Benjamin didn't dismiss the idea. In fact, it crossed my mind as well. He placed the key on a velvet cloth before carefully lifting the necklace once more. I'd like to inspect the compartment again. You think something else is inside. I've learned not to underestimate your mother. He smiled warmly at me. Margaret Hayes seems to have believed in preparing for every possibility. That made me laugh softly through my tears. You have no idea. Benjamin looked interested. Tell me about her. For the first time since arriving, we weren't talking about the necklace. We were talking about my mother. I welcomed it. When I was 10 years old, I began, a snowstorm knocked out electricity across our town. We had candles. We had blankets. We had canned food. We even had drinking water stored in glass bottles. Olivia smiled faintly. I remember you telling me that story. I nodded. Mom had prepared everything weeks earlier. Benjamin chuckled. She sounds remarkable. She was. I smiled through the ache in my chest. When Dad forgot where he hid important documents, well, she already had copies. When our roof leaked, she'd already saved enough money for repairs. When I became a mother, she gave me 3 identical baby blankets. 3, I laughed. She said one would get dirty, one would get lost, and one would save the day. Olivia smiled despite herself. She was right. Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. Everything you've described matches Arthur Whitmore's notes. He reached for one of the journals. There are dozens of references to her meticulous planning. He found the page he wanted. Mrs. Hayes reviews every detail repeatedly. Another line. She insists every safeguard should have another safeguard behind it. Benjamin looked at me. I've never encountered another client described this way. I smiled sadly. Neither have I. He carefully tilted the necklace beneath the light once more. A tiny reflection flashed from inside the compartment. I knew it. What? There is something else. Using the precision tweezers again, he reached delicately into the hidden chamber. His movements were even slower than before. A few moments later, he withdrew another object. This one wasn't metal. It was paper. But unlike the folded note, this paper was thicker, much thicker. He laid it gently on the preservation mat. It's folded differently. As he carefully opened it, I realized it wasn't actually paper. It was an old photograph, tiny, barely larger than a postage stamp. Benjamin unfolded it completely. All 3 of us leaned forward. A young woman smiled back at us. She couldn't have been older than 25. Dark hair, bright eyes, a gentle smile. Around her neck, the necklace. My hand flew to my mouth. My mother! She looked so young, so full of hope. I'd never seen this photograph before. Olivia whispered, Grandma was beautiful. I nodded silently. Benjamin turned the tiny photograph over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, were just 3 words. For Frankie. I couldn't stop the tears anymore. My mother hadn't simply hidden valuables. She had hidden memories, pieces of herself. Benjamin carefully returned the miniature photograph to its protective sleeve. This explains why Arthur called the compartment a memory chamber. A memory chamber? He nodded. He believed your mother wanted the necklace to become more than jewelry. She wanted it to become a time capsule. I stared at the tiny photograph. So she expected me to find this someday. I believe so. Benjamin looked toward the key. And perhaps she expected you to find that as well. Olivia picked up the loop again. Can I see the key? Benjamin handed it to her carefully. She examined it quietly for nearly a minute. Then something caught her attention. There's another marking. Benjamin leaned closer. Where? Inside the bow. He took the loop. A moment later, his eyebrows rose. You're right. He rotated the key toward me. Hidden inside the decorative border was a microscopic engraving, not letters this time, numbers. April 22nd, 91. I frowned. April 22nd. My mother's birthday wasn't April. Benjamin nodded. It doesn't appear to be a birth date. My parents' anniversary wasn't April either. Olivia looked thoughtful. Could it be a box number? Benjamin considered the possibility. Perhaps, but there's another explanation. What? It may represent the day something was placed into storage. My heartbeat quickened. Storage. Safe deposit. The thought immediately returned. Benjamin reached into another folder. I'd like to compare these numbers. He searched through several archived receipts before stopping abruptly. There. He slid one document toward us. It was a banking receipt, issued 35 years earlier. The bank's name had faded, but one detail remained perfectly readable. Customer Margaret Ann Hayes. My pulse raced. Below her name was another entry. Safe deposit box. Olivia looked from the receipt to the tiny brass key, then back again. Her eyes widened. 317. Benjamin nodded slowly. The same number. I could hardly breathe. This key belongs to my mother's safe deposit box. Benjamin looked almost as emotional as I felt. I believe it does. But I frowned. I never knew she had one. That doesn't surprise me. He tapped Arthur's journal. Your mother shared very little unless she believed the timing was right. Olivia stared silently at the receipt. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at her. If I hadn't sold the necklace, you never would have found any of this. There was no excuse in her voice, no attempt to justify herself, only regret. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me you were struggling. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I know. Benjamin quietly looked away, giving us a moment neither of us had expected. After a while, he spoke gently. I believe the next step is obvious. I nodded. The bank. He smiled. Yes. But I recommend we go together. Why? Because if Margaret Hayes planned this as carefully as I believe she did, he glanced once more at the tiny photograph and the brass key, then whatever waits inside safe deposit box 317 may answer questions none of us have even thought to ask. I looked down at my mother's smiling face in the miniature photograph. For the first time since her death, I no longer felt as though she were simply a memory. It felt as though she was still leading me one carefully planned step at a time. I barely slept that night. The tiny brass key never left my thoughts. Neither did the miniature photograph of my mother. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smiling at me from that tiny picture, the necklace resting around her neck exactly as it had rested around mine for more than 3 decades. It no longer felt like I was uncovering an old family mystery. It felt as though my mother was reaching across time, guiding me one step at a time. At 8:30 the following morning, Olivia picked me up. She looked different, not physically. Something in her expression had softened. The restless confidence she usually wore had been replaced by quiet reflection. She held a paper coffee cup toward me. I remembered. I looked at it. Half calf, 1 teaspoon of sugar. She smiled awkwardly. You've ordered it that way for years. I accepted the cup. Thank you. The drive was much quieter than the day before, but this silence felt different. It wasn't filled with anger. It was filled with anticipation. Benjamin had already arranged to meet us outside First Carolina Heritage Bank. The building stood on one of Asheville's oldest streets, its limestone columns and bronze doors reflecting a century of careful preservation. When we stepped from the car, Benjamin greeted us with a warm smile. I made one phone call this morning. To the bank. Yes. They confirmed something interesting. What? They still maintain historical safe deposit records dating back more than 60 years. My heart began beating faster. So the box still exists. They wouldn't discuss account details over the phone, he smiled, but they did ask us to come in. Inside the lobby felt almost timeless. Dark walnut counters, polished marble floors, large brass chandeliers. It reminded me of banks from my childhood rather than the sleek branches of today. A receptionist greeted us politely. "Good morning," Benjamin introduced us. "We're here regarding a historical safe deposit inquiry." The receptionist nodded immediately. "Miss Grace Sullivan is expecting you." She led us down a quiet hallway toward a private office. A woman in her early 60s stood as we entered. Her silver blonde hair was neatly pinned back, and she wore a navy business suit with understated elegance. "Mrs. Frances Hayes?" "Yes." She extended her hand warmly. "I'm Grace Sullivan. It's nice to meet you. You as well." She looked toward Benjamin. Mr. Carter explained a portion of the situation. "Only the portion necessary?" Grace smiled. "I appreciate that." She invited us to sit around a polished conference table. "I've already reviewed our historical archives." My pulse quickened. There was indeed a safe deposit box 317. Olivia leaned forward immediately. My grandmother's Grace opened a thick archival ledger. According to our records, the box was leased in April of 1991. She paused. "By Margaret Ann Hayes." The room fell silent, the date engraved on the tiny key. April 22nd, 1991. Benjamin and I exchanged a glance. "It matches," he whispered. Grace continued. "The lease remained active until annual payments stopped." "What happened then?" I asked. "Our policy required the contents to be secured." She turned another page. "Fortunately, Mrs. Hayes left unusually detailed legal instructions." Benjamin smiled softly. "That sounds like Margaret." Grace looked surprised. "You knew her?" "I know of her." Grace removed another folder. "I've worked here for 27 years. My predecessor handled the original account. He left extensive notes because your mother requested special handling." I felt tears threatening again. "Special handling," Grace nodded. "She instructed the bank never to release the contents without two things." Benjamin reached into his coat pocket. "The necklace." Grace smiled. "Yes." "And—" Benjamin carefully placed the tiny brass key on the table. Grace's smile widened. "The key!" Olivia looked astonished. "She required both." Grace nodded. "The necklace verified identity. The key verified intention." Benjamin chuckled quietly. "Even Arthur Whitmore didn't know that." Grace opened another envelope. There was one additional requirement. She looked directly at me. The contents were to be released only to Frances Hayes, personally. My throat tightened. "My mother really thought of everything." Grace smiled gently. "She certainly did." She stood. "If you'll excuse me for a few moments." She disappeared through a secured door. None of us spoke while we waited. I looked at Benjamin. "Did you know there was a bank involved?" I suspected, but I couldn't prove it. "What made you suspect it?" "The engraving, the key, and Arthur's notes." He smiled. "But your mother left far fewer clues than I expected." Olivia let out a nervous laugh. "I don't think I've ever met someone this organized." I smiled through my emotions. "You never really knew your grandmother as an adult. When you were born—" She was already slowing down. Olivia looked thoughtful. "I wish I'd asked her more questions." "So do I." Several minutes later, Grace returned. In her hands rested a dark green metal cash box. It wasn't large, about the size of an old family Bible. She carefully placed it on the conference table. "This is everything that remained inside safe deposit box 317. I stared at it. For 35 years. This box had waited. Grace unlocked 2 exterior latches. Then she stopped. "The final lock requires the original key." She looked at me. "Mrs. Hayes, would you like to do the honors?" My hands trembled as Benjamin carefully handed me the tiny brass key. It fit perfectly into the center lock. I turned it slowly. A soft click echoed through the room. Grace lifted the lid. Inside were several carefully arranged items, a thick sealed envelope, 3 old family photographs, a leather-bound journal, a small cloth pouch, and one final envelope with my name written across the front, not typed, handwritten, in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, to my dearest Frankie. I couldn't stop the tears. 31 years. 31 years after losing my mother. She was somehow speaking to me again. Grace quietly handed me a box of tissues. I think these belong to you now. I nodded gratefully. Benjamin looked at the journal but made no attempt to touch it. This is your family's history. You should decide where to begin. Olivia looked at me. Mom, open the letter. I carefully lifted the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, but the seal remained intact. My fingers paused over the flap. Part of me wanted to preserve this moment forever. As long as the envelope remained sealed, every possibility still existed. Every answer, every memory, every truth my mother had protected. Grace spoke gently. Take your time. No one is rushing you. I smiled weakly. My mother always said, important things deserve patience. Benjamin nodded. I believe she'd approve. I took one slow breath, then another. Finally, with trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal that had remained untouched for more than 3 decades. Inside rested several handwritten pages. On the very first page, before the letter itself even began, my mother's familiar handwriting formed a single sentence that instantly made me burst into tears. My precious Frankie, if this letter has finally reached your hands, then you have already proven that love is stronger than time. For several moments, I couldn't read another word. The tears came so suddenly that the ink blurred before my eyes. I had imagined hearing my mother's voice again 1,000 different ways over the years, but nothing prepared me for seeing her familiar handwriting speaking directly to me after more than 3 decades. My precious Frankie, if this letter has finally reached your hands, then you have already proven that love is stronger than time. I traced the first sentence with my fingertips. Benjamin quietly looked away, giving me privacy. Grace Sullivan folded her hands in front of her and remained silent. Even Olivia, who usually struggled to sit still for more than a few minutes, didn't move. I took a deep breath and continued reading aloud. My dearest daughter, if you are holding this letter, then life has unfolded in ways neither of us could completely control. Perhaps I lived long enough to tell you everything myself. Perhaps I did not. Knowing myself, I suspect I did not. A small laugh escaped through my tears. That sounds exactly like her, I whispered. Benjamin smiled gently. I was thinking the same thing, I continued. I have never believed that expensive things make a family wealthy. People will admire beautiful jewelry. They will argue over houses. They will fight over money. But none of those things become an inheritance unless they also carry love. That necklace was never meant to make you rich. It was meant to remind you who you are whenever life tried to convince you otherwise. I lowered the letter. The words settled into my heart with astonishing clarity. How many times had life tried to convince me I wasn't enough? When Thomas died, I questioned whether I was strong enough to live alone. When retirement came, I wondered whether anyone still needed me. When Olivia drifted farther away each year, I quietly blamed myself. And yesterday, when I discovered she had sold the necklace, for a brief moment, I wondered if perhaps I had failed as both a daughter and a mother. My mother somehow seemed to know every fear I would eventually face. I wiped another tear away before continuing. Frankie, do not be angry with yourself for grieving. Grief simply proves that love once lived there. Never apologize for loving deeply. The people who truly deserve your love will never ask you to. My voice cracked. Thomas. I thought immediately of my husband. After his funeral, several well-meaning people had told me to move on, to stay busy, to stop living in the past, but I had never apologized for missing him. And now, my mother, decades after writing this letter, seemed to be giving me permission to continue loving without shame. Grace quietly reached across the table and rested another tissue beside me. I smiled gratefully. Benjamin spoke softly. Would you like to stop for a while? I shook my head. No. I've waited 31 years. I'm finishing this. I turned the page. The handwriting remained steady, elegant, unmistakably hers. I have made sacrifices you may never fully understand, not because I wish to hide the truth from you, but because every mother must decide which burdens belong to her children and which belong only to herself. If I carried certain worries alone, it was because I wanted your shoulders to remain lighter than mine. I stopped again. Suddenly, dozens of childhood memories returned. My mother never complained, not when my father worked double shifts, not when the washing machine broke, not when bills piled higher than they should have. She always smiled. She always insisted everything would work out. As a child, I believed life simply treated us kindly. Only as an adult did I realize how much of that kindness had been created by her own quiet sacrifices. Olivia suddenly spoke. I don't remember Grandma ever being angry. I looked at her. Neither do I. Benjamin added thoughtfully. Arthur Whitmore described her exactly that way. He opened one of the copied workshop pages. Mrs. Hayes carries herself with uncommon peace, despite obvious hardship. I smiled sadly. That was her. I returned to the letter. If one day this necklace reaches you only after leaving your possession, do not spend your energy asking who is to blame. Instead, ask why life placed it back into your hands. There is always purpose hidden inside unexpected pain. The room became perfectly still. I slowly lowered the pages. My eyes drifted toward Olivia. She had gone pale. Tears filled her eyes before she quickly looked away. She didn't need to ask what my mother meant. Neither did I. Had Olivia betrayed me? Yes. Had her decision shattered my heart? Absolutely. But if she hadn't sold the necklace, Benjamin never would have recognized it. The hidden compartment would never have been opened. The tiny photograph would still be hidden. The brass key would never have been found. This letter would still be locked inside safe deposit box 317. An impossible realization slowly settled over me. The greatest hurt of my recent life had also become the doorway to my mother's final gift. I wasn't ready to forgive Olivia completely. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh, but for the first time, I could imagine that forgiveness might someday be possible. Benjamin seemed to read my thoughts. Your mother had remarkable wisdom, I nodded. She somehow prepared for something she couldn't possibly predict. Grace smiled. I think she understood people better than most. I turned another page. Near the bottom, a paragraph had been underlined. Frankie, there is one thing I ask of you. If your own child ever disappoints you, remember that disappointment is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. As long as your heart still hurts, love is still alive. Give yourself permission to heal before deciding what kind of mother you wish to remain. I couldn't continue. The pages slipped slightly in my trembling hands. Those words felt almost unbearably personal. My mother had never met the woman Olivia would become. She had died long before credit card debt, failed businesses, and broken promises entered our lives. Yet somehow, she had written exactly what I needed to hear. Across the table, Olivia quietly began crying. I'm so sorry, Mom. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I know saying it doesn't fix anything. She looked down at her hands. But every page of Grandma's letter makes me realize how far I've drifted from the person I wanted to be. I looked at my daughter. For the first time in years, I didn't see the woman who had sold my mother's necklace. I saw the frightened little girl who used to save injured birds and spend months buying me a Mother's Day gift with her allowance. That little girl wasn't gone. She had simply become buried beneath fear, debt, and shame. I reached across the table, not to erase what had happened, not to pretend it didn't matter, but simply to hold her hand. She squeezed mine tightly and cried harder. Benjamin quietly closed Arthur Whitmore's journal. I believe your mother has already accomplished what she hoped. I looked at him. What do you mean? He smiled warmly. She didn't preserve this necklace so a family could inherit gold. He glanced at our joined hands. She preserved it so a family could find each other again. I looked back at the remaining unread pages of my mother's letter. There were still several sheets left, and somehow, deep inside, I knew the greatest revelation had not yet been uncovered. I gently folded my mother's letter and placed it back inside its envelope. There were still several unread pages, but I needed a moment to breathe. It felt impossible that a woman who had been gone for 31 years could still change the course of my life with nothing more than ink on paper. Grace Sullivan quietly closed the green metal cash box. "There is no rush," she said softly. "These documents belong to your family now." I nodded. "Thank you," she smiled warmly. "I think your mother would be very happy to know they've finally reached you." After Grace excused herself to give us privacy, the room fell into a thoughtful silence. Benjamin sat opposite me, his hands folded neatly on the conference table. He looked relieved, not excited, not triumphant, relieved. It suddenly struck me that although we had spent 2 days talking about my mother's secret, I knew very little about the man who had devoted 2 decades of his life to finding me. I looked at him. "Benjamin." He raised his eyes. "Yes. I've asked so many questions about my mother," he smiled. "You have every right to, but I haven't asked enough about you." He looked slightly embarrassed. "My story isn't nearly as interesting." "I think it is." Olivia nodded. "I agree." Benjamin hesitated before letting out a quiet laugh. "Well, I suppose it's only fair." He leaned back in his chair. "My father was named Samuel Carter. You've mentioned him. He was 19 years old when he first walked into Arthur Whitmore's workshop looking for work." Benjamin's expression softened as though he could see the memory unfolding in front of him. He didn't know anything about jewelry. He only knew how to work hard. My grandfather had passed away unexpectedly, and Dad needed to help support his mother. He swept floors, polished tools, made coffee, ran errands. I smiled, and Arthur trained him. Benjamin nodded. Very slowly. He believed patience created better craftsmen than talent ever could. He chuckled. Dad used to tell me Arthur made him spend 6 months learning how to polish finished pieces before he was allowed to touch unfinished gold. Olivia smiled. 6 months. He complained about it constantly. Benjamin laughed. But years later, he admitted Arthur had been right. He paused for a moment before continuing. As time passed, Arthur stopped treating Dad like an employee. He treated him like family. I listened carefully. "Did your father know my mother?" Benjamin shook his head. "Only briefly. He met her several times when she visited the workshop." "What did he say about her?" Benjamin smiled. "He always described Margaret Hayes the same way. The calmest woman I've ever met." I couldn't help smiling. "That sounds like her." He said she spoke softly. She never rushed anyone, and she thanked every person in the workshop before leaving. Tears returned to my eyes. Yes, that was exactly who my mother had been. Benjamin reached into the cash box and carefully removed one of Arthur Whitmore's journals. There was one story Dad loved telling. He opened to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Arthur once accidentally scratched part of the necklace while making the hidden compartment. I gasped. "He damaged it." "Only slightly." Benjamin nodded. He was devastated. "He insisted on making an entirely new necklace, but your mother refused." I frowned. "Why?" Benjamin turned the journal toward me. Arthur had written the conversation almost word for word. Mrs. Hayes laughed kindly and said, "No family is perfect, Mr. Whitmore. Leave the tiny mark exactly where it is. One day my daughter will discover that even beautiful things can carry scars and still remain beautiful." I covered my mouth. The tiny imperfection. I remembered it. When I was a little girl, I had once asked my mother why the necklace had such a faint scratch near the pendant. She had simply smiled. "It gives it character." Now I finally understood. Benjamin gently closed the journal. My father never forgot that story. He told it to me dozens of times growing up. He smiled faintly. I thought it was just another lesson about craftsmanship. But after Arthur died, Dad discovered something else. Benjamin reached into his leather briefcase. From a protective folder, he removed a yellowed envelope. I've carried this with me for years." The front simply read Samuel, in Arthur Whitmore's handwriting. "My father received this shortly before Arthur passed away." Benjamin carefully unfolded the letter. "He asked me to memorize it before I ever showed it to anyone." He cleared his throat and began reading. Samuel. "There is one promise I must ask of you. Margaret Hayes trusted me with more than jewelry. She trusted me with hope. If fate separates her daughter from the necklace before the truth is delivered, promise me someone from our family will continue searching until Frances Hayes receives what her mother intended. No matter how many years pass, no matter how difficult the search becomes, some promises belong to generations, not individuals." Benjamin lowered the letter. "My father accepted that promise." The room was completely silent. "He searched until the day he died." Benjamin's voice became quieter. "He checked public records. He wrote letters. He contacted historical societies. He even visited 2 different Frances Hayes in South Carolina before realizing they were the wrong women." A bittersweet smile crossed his face. "He never complained. He simply believed promises mattered." I looked down at my mother's letter resting beside me. "What happened after your father died?" Benjamin looked at his hands. "The night before he passed away, he called me into his hospital room." His voice grew noticeably emotional. He couldn't speak for very long, but he reached into his bedside drawer. He handed me Arthur's journals, and he said only one sentence. Benjamin swallowed hard. "Don't let Margaret's daughter believe she was forgotten." My eyes filled instantly. He said that. Benjamin nodded. "I promised him I wouldn't stop." "And you didn't?" "No," he smiled gently. "I couldn't. I had inherited more than journals. I had inherited a promise." Olivia wiped tears from her face. "You really spent 20 years looking for Mom." Benjamin laughed quietly. "Closer to 21. You never gave up." "I came close." He admitted it honestly. "There were years when every trail ended. There were addresses that no longer existed. Married names, old census records, libraries, church registries. I even hired 2 genealogists." He smiled sheepishly. "They both told me the search might be impossible." I stared at him in disbelief. "Why keep going?" Benjamin looked directly into my eyes. "Because every time I considered stopping, I imagined your mother believing no one had kept their word." His answer broke something open inside me. For years after my mother's death, I had quietly wondered whether people eventually forgot us, whether enough time passed that our lives simply disappeared. Yet here sat a man who wasn't related to us by blood, who had never met me, who had spent over 2 decades honoring a promise made to my mother. Not because he had to, because he believed integrity mattered. I stood without realizing it, walked around the table, and wrapped my arms around Benjamin. For a moment he seemed startled, then he gently hugged me back. "Thank you," I whispered. "No." His own voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for allowing me to finish what my father started." When we stepped apart, I smiled through my tears. My mother wasn't forgotten. Benjamin smiled warmly. "No, Frances, she never was." As I looked down at the remaining unread pages of my mother's letter, I realized something extraordinary. The greatest inheritance she had left me wasn't hidden inside a necklace. It wasn't locked inside a safe deposit box. It wasn't even written on these pages. It was the quiet reminder that a single act of kindness, a single promise faithfully kept, could travel across generations and change lives long after we were gone. We remained in the conference room for another hour, but no one felt the need to rush. Grace Sullivan quietly brought fresh coffee before excusing herself again, leaving the 3 of us alone with my mother's letters, the leather journal, the tiny photograph, and decades of unanswered questions that somehow no longer felt quite so heavy. For the first time since discovering the necklace was missing, I wasn't consumed by anger. I was exhausted, emotionally exhausted. Benjamin carefully repacked Arthur Whitmore's journal into its protective case. "I'll leave the rest of your mother's letter for you to read privately." I nodded. "I think she'd have wanted that." He smiled. "I believe you're right. After another few minutes, Benjamin stood. "I have an appointment across town." He looked at me warmly. "But before I go," he reached into his pocket and placed a simple business card on the table. "If you discover anything in the journal or the remaining letters that raises questions, call me." "I will." He hesitated. "And Francis," it was the first time he had addressed me without saying Mrs. Hayes, "I hope today has given you more than answers." "It has." "What has it given you?" I thought carefully before answering. "My mother back." His eyes softened. "I was hoping you'd say that." He nodded politely toward Olivia, then toward me. "I'll leave you two some privacy." A few moments later, he was gone. The conference room suddenly felt much larger. The silence between Olivia and me was unlike any we'd ever shared. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't comfortable either. It was honest. She stared down at the coffee cup in front of her. "I don't know where to start." I folded my mother's letter and placed it gently back into its envelope. "Start with the truth," she nodded slowly. "No excuses. No interruptions. I'll try." She took a long breath before speaking. "I didn't sell Grandma's necklace because I wanted a new vacation." I remained quiet. "I didn't buy designer handbags. I didn't gamble. I wasn't living some secret luxury life." I simply listened. My business failed. I looked at her. She had owned a small interior decorating company for nearly 8 years. The last few years had been difficult, but she had always insisted everything was under control. Apparently, it hadn't been. "When COVID slowed everything down, I borrowed money." "I know. But then interest rates went up." "I borrowed more." She laughed bitterly. "I kept thinking one more project would fix everything. One more client, one more contract, one more month. It never happened." She rubbed her forehead. "I stopped telling people how bad things were." "Why?" "Because I was embarrassed." I understood that feeling more than she probably realized. Pride often disguised itself as independence. I refinanced my house. I emptied my retirement account. I maxed out 3 credit cards. Each sentence came more quietly than the one before. I even borrowed from friends. I closed my eyes briefly. "How much?" She hesitated. "I owe just over $218,000. I stared at her. Not because of the number, because she had been carrying it alone. "For how long?" "When were you going to tell me?" "I wasn't." "Why?" Fresh tears filled her eyes. "Because you've already sacrificed enough for me." I almost laughed. "Olivia, you sold my mother's necklace." "I know. You decided that for me." "I know. You never gave me the chance to help." She looked away. "I didn't want your help." "What did you want?" "I wanted you to keep believing I was successful." The confession hung in the air. I finally understood. It hadn't only been about money. It had been about shame. She wasn't protecting her finances. She was protecting the image she thought I had of her. I kept pretending everything was fine. She wiped away tears. I posted happy pictures online. I smiled at family dinners. I talked about future projects. But every night, I sat at my kitchen table trying to decide which bill could wait another month. I felt my anger shifting. Not disappearing. Shifting. There is a difference. I understood why she had done what she did. That didn't make it acceptable. Understanding and forgiveness are not the same thing. I found the necklace while looking through your dresser. She couldn't even look at me now. I remembered Benjamin's advertisement online. He specialized in estate jewelry. I convinced myself. She stopped speaking. "What?" I convinced myself Grandma would have wanted the necklace to save me. I took a slow breath. "Do you still believe that?" She shook her head immediately. "No. I think Grandma would have wanted me to ask for help." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me since this began. "Why didn't you come to me?" She answered without hesitation. "Because I couldn't bear watching disappointment appear on your face." I blinked. "What?" "I've disappointed you so many times already." She counted quietly on her fingers. "The business loan. My divorce. The second loan. The bankruptcy warning. The missed birthdays because I was working." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "I couldn't survive one more conversation where you looked at me with worry." My heart broke all over again. Olivia, I've never stopped loving you. I know, but I've stopped making you proud. Those words hurt more than anything else she'd said, because somewhere along the way, my daughter had confused concern with rejection. She thought my worry meant disappointment. She thought my advice meant criticism. She thought my silence meant judgment. How many years had we misunderstood each other? I reached across the table. She instinctively reached back. Our hands met halfway. I need you to hear me carefully. She nodded. I am angry. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. You have every right. I am hurt. I know. What you did violated my trust. I know. And trust isn't repaired overnight. She squeezed my hand tighter. I understand. I looked directly into her eyes. I'm not ready to say everything is okay. She closed her eyes. I didn't expect you to. I'm not ready to pretend this never happened. I wouldn't ask you to. I'm not even ready to forgive you today. She nodded slowly. I understand that too. The words were painful, but they were true. My mother had written, give yourself permission to heal before deciding what kind of mother you wish to remain. Healing required honesty, not shortcuts, not forced forgiveness, honesty. I took another breath, but hope flickered across Olivia's face. I am willing to see whether we can rebuild. She stared at me. You mean that? Yes. It won't happen because we're crying. It won't happen because Grandma wrote a beautiful letter. It will happen only if your actions begin matching your words. She nodded immediately. They will. You'll have to earn my trust. I will. You'll have to tell me the truth even when it's embarrassing. I promise. You'll have to let me help. At that, she broke down completely. I don't know how. You'll learn. She covered her face. I've spent years pretending I didn't need anyone. I gently squeezed her hand. Then today is the day you stop pretending. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Outside the conference room window, people hurried along the sidewalk, completely unaware that inside an old bank, a mother and daughter were beginning the slow, uncertain work of finding each other again. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't instant forgiveness. It wasn't the kind of ending movies usually preferred. It was something quieter, something more difficult, the first honest conversation we had shared in years. And somehow I had the unmistakable feeling that if my mother had been sitting beside us, she wouldn't have asked for anything more than that. 3 days passed before I saw Benjamin Carter again. Those 3 days changed something inside me. I didn't spend them thinking about the necklace's value. I spent them reading every page my mother had left behind. Each morning I made a cup of coffee, sat beside the living room window where the sunlight always reached first, and carefully unfolded another page of her letter. Sometimes I laughed. Sometimes I cried so hard I had to stop reading. She wrote about ordinary things that suddenly felt extraordinary. She reminded me how terrified she had been on my first day of kindergarten. She confessed that she had secretly cried after dropping me off, then circled the block twice because she couldn't bear to drive away. She described the day I learned to ride a bicycle, the night I stayed awake with a fever, the afternoon I announced I wanted to become a librarian because books never laugh at lonely people. I had forgotten saying that. She hadn't, not a single detail. By the time I reached the final page, I realized something profound. My mother hadn't spent 30 years preparing an inheritance. She had spent 30 years preserving memories. Money disappears. Jewelry can be stolen. Homes can burn. But memories once shared become impossible to take away. Late that Friday afternoon, Benjamin called. Mrs. Francis. I smiled when I heard him correct himself. Hello, Benjamin. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I was wondering if you and Olivia might have time to stop by the gallery tomorrow. Is everything all right? Everything is more than all right. His voice carried a warmth that immediately caught my attention. I have something that belongs to you. The next morning, Olivia arrived exactly on time. That alone surprised me. Over the previous few days, she had called every evening, not because she needed money, not because she wanted reassurance, simply to ask, "How are you today?" At first, our conversations lasted only 5 minutes, then 10. Then nearly an hour. We weren't repairing 30 years overnight, but we had stopped pretending everything was fine, and that felt like progress. When we entered Carter Historical Jewelry, Benjamin greeted us with the same gentle smile. But today, something on the counter immediately caught my attention: the velvet tray, the necklace. It rested there beneath soft lighting, looking almost exactly as it had the first day we met. Only now, I understood what it truly represented. Benjamin motioned for us to sit. I've been thinking a great deal since our last meeting. So have we, I admitted. He nodded. I imagine he opened a small folder. I completed the authentication process. Olivia looked confused. Authentication, Benjamin smiled. I wanted to verify every historical record connected to your mother's necklace. He laid several certified documents on the table. The gold composition matches Arthur Whitmore's workshop records. The engraving is original. The concealed compartment is exactly as documented. The miniature photograph dates to the late 1960s. He looked at me. There is absolutely no doubt. This is the original Hayes family necklace. I smiled softly. I never questioned that. I know. But museums would. I laughed. Museums, Benjamin nodded. I've already received 3 inquiries. I frowned. Inquiries? Word travels quickly among historical collectors. He hesitated. I've declined everyone. Olivia looked surprised. You told people about it. Only enough to verify its authenticity. He slid another document toward me. One sentence immediately caught my eye. Private purchase offer. $425. 000. I blinked. Surely I had read it incorrectly. I looked again. $425,000. My breathing slowed. Olivia stared at the number in complete disbelief. They offered... Benjamin nodded. Yesterday. My eyes lifted toward him. You refused... Immediately. Without negotiating. He smiled. There was nothing to negotiate. I looked back down at the document. Nearly $500,000. A few days earlier, I would never have imagined such a number. Benjamin quietly folded the offer and placed it back inside the folder. I thought you deserved to know. But I also wanted you to hear something else. What? I will never assist in selling this necklace. Olivia looked genuinely confused. But that's your business. Benjamin shook his head. My business is preserving history. Sometimes that means selling antiques. Sometimes it means refusing to. He gently lifted the necklace. I promised my father I would return this to its rightful owner. He walked around the counter until he stood directly in front of me. Then with both hands he offered it back. No ceremony, no dramatic speech, just quiet respect. This belongs with you, Francis. My hands trembled as I accepted it. The familiar weight settled into my palms. For a long moment I simply looked at it. It felt different now. Not because the necklace had changed, because I had. Benjamin smiled. Would you allow me? I nodded. He carefully fastened the necklace around my neck. The cool gold rested against my skin exactly where it had so many times before, except this time, I understood every tiny detail. The scratch, the engraving, the hidden compartment, the tiny photograph, the note, the key, the decades of waiting. It no longer felt like jewelry. It felt like my mother embracing me. Olivia quietly wiped tears from her eyes. It looks like it belongs there. Benjamin nodded. It always did. Silence filled the gallery. Not an uncomfortable silence, the peaceful kind. Finally, Olivia reached into her handbag. There's something I need to do. She removed an envelope and placed it on the counter in front of Benjamin. He looked puzzled. What is this? My cashier's check. He didn't touch it. For what? The money. Benjamin frowned slightly. The money I paid you for the necklace. He slowly pushed the envelope back toward her. I don't want it. She shook her head firmly. No, I do. I can't erase what I did, but I can stop benefiting from it. Benjamin looked at me. I simply nodded. She continued. I sold something that never belonged to me. I don't deserve a single dollar from it. Benjamin smiled gently. I believe your grandmother would be proud of that decision. Olivia's eyes filled again. I hope someday my mother will be too. I reached over and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. I already see someone trying. She leaned into me like she had when she was a little girl. Benjamin quietly turned toward the gallery window, giving us another private moment. After a while, he spoke without facing us. "Do you know what Arthur Whitmore once wrote?" Neither of us answered. He smiled softly. He said, "The finest heirloom is never made of gold. It is the moment one generation chooses to leave the next a better heart than the one they inherited." I touched the necklace resting against my chest. For the first time since this journey began, its greatest value had nothing to do with gold. It was no longer a symbol of what my family had almost lost. It had become a symbol of what, against all odds, we had begun to find again. The following Sunday, I invited Olivia to my house for dinner. It was the first invitation I had extended without hesitation in a very long time. For years, our visits had become rushed. She would arrive late, answer work calls between bites of food promise. We would spend more time together next week and leave before dessert. Somewhere along the way, we had both accepted that as normal. I no longer wanted normal. I wanted intentional. When Olivia knocked on my front door that afternoon, she wasn't carrying her phone in one hand and her car keys in the other. Instead, she held 2 grocery bags. "I brought ingredients." I smiled. "For what?" She looked almost shy. "I thought maybe we could make Grandma's chicken pot pie together." My heart skipped. I hadn't cooked that recipe with anyone since my mother passed away. "You still remember it?" She laughed softly. "I remember eating it. I don't remember making it." "Then today we'll fix that." The kitchen filled with familiar sounds almost immediately. Vegetables being chopped, butter melting in a cast-iron skillet, the gentle clink of measuring cups. For a while, we talked about ordinary things: the weather, a neighbor who had recently retired, a new bookstore opening downtown. It felt surprisingly comfortable, as if we were cautiously learning how to become mother and daughter again instead of simply remaining connected by biology. While rolling pie dough, Olivia suddenly stopped. "Mom?" "Yes." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She dusted flour from her hands. "What was Grandma like before I was born?" I smiled. "I've been waiting years for you to ask that." She looked down. "I guess I was always too busy." "Then let's not waste today." I leaned against the counter. "What? Your grandmother loved routines. Every Saturday morning, she baked bread. Every Sunday evening, she wrote letters. Every birthday, no matter whose, she planted something." Olivia looked surprised. "Planted something. A flower, a tree, sometimes just herbs. She believed celebrations should keep growing after the day itself ended." Olivia smiled. "I like that." So did I. I opened one of the albums I had taken from the safe deposit box. Inside were photographs I hadn't examined carefully until that morning. Many were familiar, others weren't. One picture immediately caught my attention. It showed my mother standing beside Arthur Whitmore outside his jewelry workshop. Arthur held a small wooden box. My mother was laughing. On the back of the photograph, written in Arthur's handwriting, were the words, "Every masterpiece deserves a story worth protecting." Benjamin had been right. Arthur hadn't simply created jewelry. He had preserved memories. Another photograph showed something even more unexpected. A younger Samuel Carter stood beside Arthur. Both men were smiling while sanding a workbench. Benjamin's father couldn't have been older than 20. I handed the photograph to Olivia. "So that's Benjamin's father." "I think so." She studied it carefully. "It's strange." "What is?" "None of these people were related to us." "No. But somehow, they protected our family's history almost as carefully as Grandma did." I nodded. "That's been on my mind, too." Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Benjamin stood on the porch carrying a flat archival storage box. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Come in." He stepped inside and immediately smiled when he smelled dinner. "Chicken pot pie," I laughed. "You recognized it." "My father loved that recipe." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "How would he know Grandma's recipe?" Benjamin chuckled. He didn't. But Arthur did. He looked around the kitchen. Arthur used to close the workshop early every Christmas Eve. Your grandmother always brought enough food for everyone. I stared at him. I never knew that. Benjamin nodded. She insisted apprentices shouldn't spend Christmas hungry if they had nowhere else to go. I suddenly understood something about my mother that I hadn't before. She hadn't only prepared for her own family, she quietly cared for people outside it as well. Benjamin placed the archival box on the dining table. I found something while reorganizing Arthur's remaining records. What is it? I think you should see. He carefully opened the box. Inside were dozens of handwritten thank you letters. Some came from customers. Others came from employees. One envelope immediately stood out. The front read, "To Margaret Hayes." It was never mailed, Benjamin explained. My father found it among Arthur's belongings after his death. I carefully unfolded the letter. Arthur's handwriting was bold and confident. Dear Margaret, you once apologized for asking me to build a necklace that carried secrets instead of gemstones. You need never apologize. Every craftsman dreams of creating one object that means more than its materials. Gold can be purchased, diamonds can be replaced, but trust cannot be manufactured. Thank you for trusting me with your family's future, Arthur. I quietly folded the letter again. He admired her. Benjamin smiled. He respected her. There's a difference. I nodded. You're right. We carried dinner to the table. For the first time in years, conversation flowed naturally. Benjamin shared stories about Samuel Carter learning the trade. Olivia laughed while attempting to copy Grandma's pie crust technique and failing spectacularly. I teased her exactly the way my mother used to tease me. The evening felt warm. Not because every wound had healed, because healing had finally begun. After dessert, Benjamin prepared to leave. Before stepping outside, he paused. There's one last thing. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed me a small envelope. No mysteries this time. I smiled. I appreciate that. It's simply a copy. Of what? The ownership records. I opened the envelope. Inside were professionally restored copies of Arthur Whitmore's original commission documents. Attached to them was a small note in Benjamin's handwriting. Family history belongs with family, not inside archives. My throat tightened. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. He smiled warmly. My father's promise ended when the necklace found you. But friendship doesn't have an expiration date. I looked at him for a long moment. You know, my mother would have invited you for dinner every Sunday. Benjamin laughed. I suspect she would have insisted. I think she would. Olivia smiled. Then maybe we should. Benjamin looked genuinely surprised. You mean that? I nodded. Families aren't always built only by blood. Sometimes they're built by the people who choose to keep showing up. Benjamin's eyes glistened slightly. I'd like that very much. As I watched him walk down my front path, I looked back into my home. My daughter was washing dishes while quietly humming. The necklace rested gently against my collarbone. My mother's photographs were spread across the dining table, and for the first time in many years, my house no longer felt like a place that preserved only the past. It had become a place where the future finally felt welcome. Summer slowly gave way to autumn. The maple tree in my front yard turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, scattering leaves across the walkway exactly as it had every October since Thomas planted it 25 years earlier. For the first time in a long while, I noticed its beauty instead of simply sweeping the leaves away. Life hadn't become perfect. It had become intentional. Every Sunday, Benjamin joined Olivia and me for dinner. Sometimes we cooked. Sometimes we ordered takeout and laughed about our failed recipes. Sometimes we spent hours looking through old photographs while Benjamin filled in pieces of history that had disappeared long before I was born. Those evenings became something I quietly looked forward to all week. One Sunday, Benjamin arrived carrying another archival folder. Olivia laughed as soon as she saw it. Please tell me this isn't another hidden secret? Benjamin chuckled. I promised you the mysteries were over. So what's this? just something I finally finished restoring. He placed the folder carefully on the dining table. Inside was a large black and white photograph. The image had clearly been damaged years ago and painstakingly repaired. At first glance, I recognized my mother immediately. She stood in the center of the photograph wearing the necklace. Beside her stood Arthur Whitmore. On Arthur's other side was Samuel Carter. Behind them, smiling proudly, stood several young apprentices. Benjamin pointed toward the edge of the photograph. "My father is there," I smiled. "He looks so young." He was. Benjamin's finger moved to Arthur. "My father used to say Arthur never smiled for photographs. But whenever your mother visited, someone always managed to make him laugh." I looked more closely. Arthur's expression wasn't simply polite. He looked genuinely happy, as though the people around him mattered more than the jewelry he created. Then I noticed something else. Near the bottom of the photograph, almost hidden by the restored edge, was a small handwritten caption. "Friendship is the only treasure that increases when shared." I whispered the words aloud. Benjamin smiled. Arthur wrote that on nearly every workshop group photograph. I couldn't help thinking how perfectly those words described the journey we had all shared. The necklace had brought us together. Friendship had kept us together. After dinner that evening, Olivia surprised both of us. "I have news." Benjamin smiled. "Good news, I hope." "I think so." She looked at me first. "Mom, I met with a financial counselor." I smiled encouragingly. "And I sold my office. I downsized the business. I negotiated payment plans with my creditors." She laughed softly. "It turns out asking for help is cheaper than pretending everything is fine." We all laughed. "I still have a long road ahead." She looked directly at me. "But I'm paying every dollar back honestly." I reached across the table. "I'm proud of you." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "You mean that?" "I do. Not because everything is fixed, but because you're finally facing the truth." Benjamin quietly raised his coffee mug. "To honest beginnings." We gently clinked our cups together. Several weeks later, another unexpected visitor arrived. Grace Sullivan called one afternoon. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. I've been cleaning old storage files, and I found something addressed to your mother." My heart immediately skipped. "Another letter?" "No. A small package." She laughed softly. "It appears your mother left surprises everywhere." The next morning, I met Grace at the bank. She handed me a small wrapped parcel no larger than a paperback novel. It was misfiled decades ago. There was no legal importance attached to it, so it remained in archival storage. I carefully untied the faded ribbon. Inside was a simple wooden recipe box. Nothing expensive, nothing ornate, just polished oak worn smooth by years of use. When I lifted the lid, handwritten recipe cards filled the box. Chicken pot pie, apple pie, Sunday roast, cinnamon bread, blueberry preserves, every family favorite. Tucked inside the very front was one folded note. I unfolded it carefully. My mother's familiar handwriting greeted me one final time. Frankie families are rarely held together by grand speeches. Most are held together by ordinary Tuesdays, shared meals, and remembering who takes one spoonful of sugar in their coffee. I laughed through fresh tears. She remembered everything, even coffee. I carried the recipe box home like the priceless treasure it truly was. That Sunday, I placed it in the center of the dinner table. Olivia immediately recognized it. "Grandma's recipe box." I thought it had been lost. So did I. Benjamin smiled. "I've learned never to underestimate Margaret Hayes." We spent the evening cooking directly from her handwritten cards. Some instructions made us laugh. "More pepper if Arthur is coming." "Double the biscuits if Samuel stays late." "Never trust a pie crust mixed in a hurry." Each recipe contained little notes about the people she loved. Food had never simply been food to her. It had been another way of preserving memories. After dinner, we stepped onto the back porch. The evening air had turned crisp. Leaves drifted quietly across the yard. Olivia looked toward the old maple tree. "You know, I used to think inheritance meant money." Benjamin nodded. "A lot of people do." She smiled thoughtfully. Now I think inheritance is remembering how someone made people feel. I looked at her with quiet pride. Your grandmother would agree. Benjamin reached into his coat pocket. I almost forgot. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside rested the tiny brass key. I blinked. I thought I already had it. You had the original. I made a silver replica. I looked up confused. Why? So the original can rest safely with the necklace. And the replica, he smiled, a reminder. Of what? That every family carries doors waiting to be opened. I closed my fingers gently around the small silver key. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't ancient. But somehow it carried every lesson the past few weeks had taught me. Healing doesn't happen all at once. Trust isn't rebuilt with apologies alone. Love survives disappointment when people choose honesty over pride. As darkness settled over the yard, I rested my hand lightly against the necklace around my neck. For years, I had believed my mother left me one precious heirloom. I finally understood the truth. She hadn't left me one. She had left me dozens. Letters, recipes, photographs, promises, friendships, forgiveness, and perhaps the greatest gift of all, the courage to believe that broken families, when willing to tell each other the truth, can still find their way home. I had a feeling my mother's final lesson was almost complete. The first snowfall arrived just before Christmas. I woke early that morning, pulled back the living room curtains, and watched soft white flakes settle over the front yard. The maple tree stood bare, now its branches outlined in delicate snow, and for a brief moment I was carried back to the winter mornings of my childhood. My mother always loved the first snow. She would wake me before sunrise, wrap a blanket around my shoulders, and whisper, "The world deserves to be admired before people hurry through it." I had forgotten those words for years. Now they returned as naturally as breathing. I smiled. "Good morning, Mom." It no longer hurt to say those words aloud, not because I missed her less, because I finally felt her presence in the life she had prepared for me. Around noon, Olivia arrived carrying 2 pies. I made them myself. I raised an eyebrow. Without burning the crust. She laughed. "Barely. I called 3 different times to make sure I remembered Grandma's recipe correctly. You could have asked me. I wanted to prove I could do it." I hugged her. "I'm glad you did." A few minutes later, Benjamin pulled into the driveway. As always, he wasn't empty-handed. This time, he carried a simple wooden picture frame wrapped in brown paper. "I have one last Christmas gift." "You've already done more than enough," I said. He smiled. My father would have argued otherwise. We gathered around the dining room table. The house smelled of roasted turkey, fresh bread cinnamon, and apple pie. For the first Christmas in many years, my dining room didn't feel too large. It felt exactly the right size. Before dinner, Benjamin handed me the wrapped package. I carefully removed the paper. Inside was the restored workshop photograph we had seen months earlier, now beautifully framed behind museum-quality glass. Arthur Whitmore stood proudly beside my mother. Samuel Carter smiled in the background. Young apprentices surrounded them, and there, standing in the middle with quiet confidence, was Margaret Hayes. Below the photograph, Benjamin had added a small engraved brass plaque. It read, "Margaret Hayes. She measured wealth by the people she loved." I stared at the inscription until tears blurred the words. "It's beautiful." Benjamin shook his head gently. "No." "The woman in the photograph was." I looked up. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do. I've spent more than 20 years reading the lives of remarkable people," he smiled. "Very few changed others without asking for recognition. Your mother did." I carefully placed the framed photograph on the fireplace mantel. It looked as though it had always belonged there. As we sat down for dinner, Olivia cleared her throat. "I have something I'd like to say." Benjamin and I both looked toward her. She unfolded a small piece of paper, then smiled nervously. "I wrote this because I knew I'd lose my courage if I tried to say it from memory." She looked directly at me. "Mom, I spent years believing success meant never letting anyone see me struggle. I thought asking for help meant failure. I thought appearances mattered more than honesty." She paused, taking a shaky breath. I was wrong. She looked toward the necklace resting around my neck. When I sold Grandma's necklace, I wasn't only selling gold, I was selling trust. I hurt the two women who loved me most. Fresh tears filled her eyes. One of them isn't here for me to apologize to. She looked upward briefly before returning her eyes to mine. But you are. She folded the paper. I'm sorry. Not because everything worked out. Not because we found letters. Not because Benjamin brought the necklace home. I'm sorry because I betrayed the values Grandma spent her whole life teaching us. Silence settled over the table. No one rushed to fill it. I reached across and took her hand. I accept your apology. She looked surprised. I smiled softly. Do you know why? She shook her head. Because for the first time, I believe the woman apologizing is the same woman who intends never to repeat the mistake. She burst into tears. So do I. We embraced for a long time. When we finally sat down again, Benjamin quietly raised his glass. I think Margaret Hayes would tell us we're letting the turkey get cold. All three of us laughed. The laughter felt wonderfully ordinary. Exactly the kind of ordinary my mother always cherished. After dinner, we exchanged small gifts. Nothing extravagant. A knitted scarf. A first-edition novel Benjamin found for me. A handwritten cookbook I helped Olivia create using Grandma's recipe cards with blank pages added for future family recipes. At the bottom of the first page, Olivia had written, "For the generation still to come." That simple sentence nearly brought me to tears again. Later that evening, after Benjamin had gone home and Olivia was loading dishes into the dishwasher, I stepped outside alone. Snow continued falling gently across the yard. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. I looked up at the winter sky and rested one hand over the necklace. I finally understand, I whispered. For years I had believed my mother's greatest gift was the necklace itself. Then I believed it was the hidden compartment, then the photograph, then the key, then the letters. But standing there beneath the falling snow, I realized every one of those treasures had simply been a path leading toward something much greater. My mother hadn't wanted to leave me an object. She wanted to leave me a way of living, to prepare instead of panic, to tell the truth before secrets became burdens, to value people above possessions, to forgive without forgetting wisdom, to remember that love isn't measured by perfection but by perseverance. Most of all, she wanted me to understand that family isn't defined by the absence of mistakes. It's defined by the willingness to repair them. A few days after Christmas, Benjamin called one final time. I've made a decision. What kind of decision? I'm retiring, I smiled. You've earned it. He laughed. I think so. I've donated Arthur Whitmore's journals to the Asheville Historical Museum. What about your father's records? They're going with them. I paused. Aren't you afraid they'll be forgotten? His answer came immediately. No, because the most important part of their story isn't inside those journals anymore. It isn't. No, it's sitting around your dinner table every Sunday. I smiled through tears. He was right. The promise Arthur made, the promise Samuel kept, the promise Benjamin fulfilled, none of it ended with a museum. It lived on through the relationships those promises restored. When we hung up, I looked around my home. The framed photograph rested above the fireplace. The recipe box sat in the kitchen. The leather journal occupied a place of honor on my bookshelf. The tiny brass key and its silver replica rested together inside a small glass display case. And the necklace. The necklace remained where it belonged. Not because of its value, because every time I touched it, I remembered exactly who I wanted to be. That I realized was the only inheritance anyone truly needs. Life has a way of convincing us that what matters most can be counted appraised or locked inside a safe. We chase promotions, larger homes, fuller bank accounts, believing security comes from what we own. Yet the most valuable things in my life were never hidden in a vault. They were hidden in quiet acts of kindness, promises faithfully kept handwritten, recipes, family stories, and the courage to admit when we were wrong. My mother understood something I spent decades learning. Possessions may introduce us to one another, but character determines whether we stay together. If this story reminds you of someone who quietly shaped your life, tell them while you still can. Ask about their stories. Write down their recipes. Preserve their laughter, not just their photographs. One day, those ordinary moments may become the greatest treasures your family will ever inherit. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments. What is one family heirloom or even one family memory you hope will never be lost? I'd love to read your story, and no matter where you're watching from, thank you for spending this time with me.